As Gay mentioned, the topic of sustainability is an important one, and as she also mentioned, whilst it sounds a bit bland, a lot of what we do in terms of guidelines, best practices and standards is in relation to good old operational efficiency and effectiveness, which in this topic is incredibly important. It came up here at our last AdOps event about 6-7 months ago in this very room as a topic, and we've also been looking at marketers and agencies' feedback through various articles and Q&As as the topic sort of started gaining legs last year. So there is, and it has to be remembered, there's currently a fair amount of discussions around some of the challenges in relation to particularly measurability of what we're trying to optimize. But there does remain, for companies that have that value and value or purpose-driven philosophically, there are commercial opportunities if we get it right. And if we get it right as an industry, I think we can all agree that we're moving things forwards and just behaving in the right way. So yes, Gay mentioned that we're working on having a sustainability working group. We'll launch this calendar year. We'll call in members from all areas. Some of the discussions on that group was actually in relation to ensuring that it's representative and that as many members can join as possible. As a starting point, and I'm not just saying this because Seb's on the stage, I really like the report they put out in July, the Media Decarbonising report, because it's a great starting point for you as just an initial read, setting the agenda. It's a good 20 minutes of your time. It's very well spent. And I really like this visual. This is specifically around digital video. They actually have a few versions that include non-digital, if there is such a thing. And the interesting thing for me, not only are the estimations of the sort of effort that's in there, that's very important, you can see the interactivity. We're all connected, we're all interconnected. And there's a massive focus on publishers and media owners and what's coming through ad calls on the page that ultimately results in computational loads and efforts to produce the ads, let alone the content. But don't forget that starts on the creative agency side. We've done work in our Standards and Guidelines Council in relation to best practices around what's being kind of shoved through the tags, which frankly is all you lot wanting to measure everything. And of course you want the ads to look beautiful, that's fine. But the weight of assets, being smart about how you can deliver those assets, and it's difficult for publishers to actually moderate and control what's coming through third-party tags. There's monitoring of it, but there's not always the level of controls. So this, I think, will have an interesting operational impact for the guys at the coalface, as it were, and we will be talking about that next month in our Melbourne AdOps event, where we'll dive into the details of it. So I didn't want to bore you to tears, and I might have failed, but the bit that's also important is in the middle. So automation, you deem to be incredibly efficient, but actually, whilst there's a small period of time to make a lot of things happen, that can be managed more efficiently, and that again sits in the world of standards in terms of the efforts of optimizing both through the supply chain and the demand chain, known as SPO and DPO. So these are all bits that it's manageable, it's measurable, but we need to come together to work out a consistent method of measurement and exactly what the metrics are. So pulling out of that now, I'll hand over to Carolyn, who can provide a little more context around, I mean, I didn't know what Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 was a few months ago, to be honest. So would you like the click, or I can click for you?
Oh, sure.
You click away.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Carolyn Cosgrove. I'm a partner at PwC in our sustainability and climate change team. And I get the pleasure of explaining Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. So I will also try not to bore you to tears. But I thought I would start by taking a simple example. So if we think about this conference today, and we break up the different types of emissions, Scope 1 means things that happen at site on source. So when things are burned, typically. In an example here, if there was a natural gas water heater on site, that would be considered a Scope 1. Scope 2 is once removed, so it's electricity that's purchased off the grid. So once removed from however that electricity is being generated, so all the lights, all the electricity being used in the building. Scope 3, which is what we're here to speak about today, is slightly more ambiguous, and it is everything else, that is all other emissions that are emitted in sort of within the control of the organization in making this happen. And so some examples of that are the equipment that we're using, the mic that I'm using, what emissions were emitted in production of this microphone, of the screens, of the chairs, also the transport that got everyone here. So how did everyone get here? And all of those emissions fall under the bucket of Scope 3. And as you would expect, there's a lot of challenges in measuring that, both from understanding where to sort of set the boundaries and what does get captured in Scope 3 for each organization, particularly when you're talking about across a value chain. And so where does everyone's boundary begin and end? And the other way to think about Scope 3 is that everyone's Scope 3 is someone else's Scope 1 or Scope 2. And so in the example of transport, if you took the bus here, well, it's the petrol from that bus, whether it's the city of Sydney, that would be their Scope 1. And so there is some interaction between them. And so what we're here to talk about is Scope 3. I'm hopefully going to be able to provide a bit of insight from what's happening broadly across industry, so how other industries are looking at it, what some of their challenges and learnings are, and also what's happening from a global and a local perspective around regulation and reporting. So I'll jump to the next one. Anything to add on for any of the Scope 3 experts? So some of the key challenges, as I mentioned, in measuring Scope 3 is that measurement with certainty. So setting that boundary, the way that companies, organizations, governments try to look at it is the boundary is set by where your control sort of stops and ends. So where you have the ability to either control or influence how an activity is undertaken is typically what falls within your operational boundary. Once you've figured out what you need to measure, then it's how do you measure it, and how, once you've understood the kilometers traveled by the people getting here, once you've understood who produces this microphone, how do you actually attribute the emissions for that activity? And there are many different methods, and there's some that have more accurate data that underpin them just due to data availability, and others that are still more of an estimation. And so coming up with the best estimate or the best actual calculation can be a challenge. And then also just the pure volume of information that underpins some of these calculations. So how do you collect and manage the data to be able to get to an emissions number that you can then sort of understand, unpick, and look to reduce?
Actually, I think on this one, we can bring it up in the panel if that's all right. And
yes,
these slides
absolutely.
are available to all of you, downloadable. We will provide them through email, and it'll be, I think, available online too to members. So just to get into the panel, can I ask the panelists to introduce themselves, starting from June to the left, please?
Hi, my name is June Chung. I started a company called Scope 3, tackling decarbonisation, reducing carbon. Based on what Carolyn just said, I think I signed to a really tough challenge. But on your boundaries note, so from a Scope 3 perspective, we divide the boundaries based on when ad is produced, the content, when the ad is served, the technology behind it, and when the ad is consumed by consumer at the device level. So we set the boundaries, but we're working closely with IAB and the Exec Tech Council to define it as an industry. So from a Scope 3 emission perspective, we've done a good job when we reduce the carbon in our advertising ecosystem. But to do that, we need to kind of agree on an industry standard. So, yeah. Cool.
Carolyn, well, we've met.
I'm Carolyn.
Morning, everyone. My name's Adam Roberts. I'm Sales Director at CNIS. We're an adaptive ad streaming tech solution, and essentially what we provide our partners and clients is a very effective way of delivering content to an ad unit, minimizing wasted data or the wastage of data in the delivery of ad content.
Thank you.
Morning, everyone. My name's Seb Rennie. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Group M. Group M is WPP's media investment management arm, and my role is to lead the partnerships with all of our media partners and in terms of the sustainability piece, I'm sort of working closely with our global innovations team to make sure that we can bring the work and the objectives that we've set as an organisation to bear in Australia through conversations with advertisers and our people and clients.
So, give the panelists a quick round of applause. Honestly, I'm so impressed. They've sat in order and they've got the footwear memo. Well done, panellists. Good start. So, Carolyn, back to you in setting the scene. I skipped over that slide because we'll be the attendees will be able to download it. But what learnings have we got from other industries to give us a starting point in just how to tackle this?
So, a few key learnings. First is some measurement is better than no measurement. And so, while we've just discussed a lot of the challenges, it's really important to start. And in doing that, it's often more palatable and easier to start small. So you may not set out to measure literally everything in an organization, everything across the value chain, but pick certain product and map out the value chain for that product or that method of delivery. So start small because it's more important to start with a meaningful and really start to understand what information you do have and you don't have. And the second is collaboration. This is an exercise in collaboration unlike we've seen. And in some different industries where they've trying to work out their scope 3, you will start to reach challenges around commercial sensitivity because there's going to be an amount of data that's shared that wasn't historically. And there are solutions around that. Some other industries have found things like a sort of a black box solution where you put your information into one central hub. And so I guess that's to say, don't let the challenges scare you away from it. Start small. Reach out to those in your value chain, and understand that there are solutions that will continue to develop for some of the challenges that we're starting to see.
Thank you. Yeah, and Seb, I mentioned the report that came out in July, which I found a really good starting point for myself in terms of just setting the agenda. But how else are you, as a company, approaching this specifically in relation to advertising?
So I guess that the evolution of that report, I've got to start with WPP sustainability commitments. So we've made commitments around our scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions reductions over the next 5 to 7 years, so 2025 and 2030. When we looked at the overall emissions, we're one of the only ad companies that's included our media buying footprint as part of our scope 3 emissions. So to put it in context, our scope 1 and 2 make up about 2% of our overall emissions, and our scope 3 is the 98%. Of that, about 55% is our media buying footprint. So we recognised that if we were going to deliver on the commitments we'd made to our shareholders, we needed to make sure that we could move forward with a robust measurement methodology. Now, there's been a number of media carbon calculators available in the market, but on review it became apparent that there was a lot of inconsistencies in the way that they'd been put together, and the data varied by calculator, by channel, by market. So in order for us to meet this goal of meeting our targets and ultimately decarbonising media, we felt that we needed to agree on a methodology for the measurement of it. So our global innovation team, they worked with one of the big 4 ESG practices, some experts in the field, and the output of all of that work was the white paper that was released in July this year. Now, that white paper is available to anyone. It's available for download on our website, because our view is that the situation around climate change and the urgency behind decarbonisation is so urgent that if we can't get alignment on measurement, then there's a danger the industry spends 2 to 3 years arguing about the right way to do it. So our feeling is that we would rather push the work that we've done out to the entire industry and try and get that broad advocacy and broad acceptance. So we're working with people like the World Federation of Advertisers, Ad Net Zero, to gain their support in that ambition. And that's kind of where we've got to from a global perspective. More locally, we've done some work in Australia. One of the things that we recognised as we were looking into this is that the The Australian power grid is particularly inefficient. It's about 3 to 4 times more inefficient than the UK, for example. So an impression in the UK is going to have 3 to 4 times less impact on the environment than an impression in Australia. So we've set something up called the Digital Sustainability Initiative, and we've partnered with a company called Goodloop. And Goodloop have got a tag-based a measurement methodology that allows us to measure the impressions that we generate from our digital activity on the open web. And through that, we've got the option to offset and then offer advertisers climate positive action. And I think it's really important to note, just on the offsetting piece, that we felt that offsetting was a step in the right direction. But I want to be really clear that our goal is to decarbonise media, not to have an offset solution. But when we got the insight about the inefficiency of the power grid in Australia, we felt that it was better to do something rather than nothing. So this is an incremental step towards the goal of decarbonisation. What we've been testing it over the last 2 or 3 months. We've had about 25 clients partake in it. We've measured 216 million impressions, and to date we've offset about 180 metric tonnes of carbon.
Great, thank you for that update. That's fascinating. And June, just to dive into the weeds of it a little bit around the auction mechanics, Scope 3, from early on, you've got the GitHub repositories, you can actually look at the method of calculation. Tell us a little bit about Scope 3's approach to that sort of, the bit in the middle, as I've just glibly referred to it.
Yeah, I might start off broad, JJ, and then go down. So for the group, from the advertising perspective, what we want to do is decarbonise, reduce carbon. Carolyn mentioned there's different methodologies. There's estimates and there's also detailed data. So from Scope 3 approach, we're a data measurement business, and we want to get into the detail, because with detail you can take action. With estimates, as a media planner from a Group M perspective, it's hard for them to decide which publisher is the highest carbon, which one's the lowest one. So from Scope 3, we're looking at detailed data in digital advertising and how can we optimise to both carbon and also other campaign metrics. Now, diving into, say, starting small, we're starting with programmatic to begin with. So some stats here for the group. 1 ad impression is 1 gram of carbon. So 1 million impressions is 1 metric tonne. So how do you put that into perspective? So each of us, an individual Australian, emits 15 tonnes of carbon a year. So you think, Carolyn's sitting over here next to me, she's composting, she's turning off the lights, she's maybe driving an electric vehicle, and that's 15 tonnes she's still emitting. Just a very small digital media campaign of 15 million is already that. So you scale that up across the whole industry. It's a lot of carbon that we're emitting, and a lot of it's unseen as well for the consumer. You see an ad, we're putting ads onto ad servers. You're not really realising how much carbon is happening in the background. So I want to paint a bit of a visual picture. So ad impressions, what happens, there's about 100 data server touch points that go in the background, and data servers are these big whirling machines. They're computers, they're really hot, they use a lot of energy. They're big energy suckers. Like, there's development areas in London where they can't build new houses because data centres are using all the energy in the grid. They require a lot of air conditioning to cool it. So as a digital advertising industry, people ask me and go, okay, how big is our challenge? Our challenge is probably equivalent to aviation, is 2%. It might be small in comparison to coal energy or transport, but the beauty of what we're doing is we influence consumers on what they buy. We spend billions of dollars every day to go, hey, buy this product. We also have the opportunity as an industry to use our money for good, to influence behaviours, to show other industries how we can decarbonise.
Thank you. That's a great starting point. I thought I'd flick back to that visual to help visualise June's points there. So, Adam, over to Seen This, and I know it's an area that one of your solutions obviously works directly in, but how can we improve the emissions then of some heavier ads? We talk about video here, for instance, but there's a wide range of them ever proliferating.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for us, our focus is about looking at where we can reduce data wastage in the development or delivery of ad content. And currently, legacy technology is incredibly inefficient in the amount of data that is required to deliver ad content to an ad unit. What we've seen is the ability to apply streaming technology, a much more efficient technology, in the amount of data that's actually required to deliver that same file to an ad unit is a lot more efficient. I mean, you know, June mentioned there, you know, some of the emission figures. I mean, the internet globally contributes about 2% of global greenhouse gas emissions. 30% of the energy that is powered or used by the internet is for the transfer of data. Now, when you apply a streaming technology across that, what we're seeing is, on average, around a 60% reduction in the amount of data, the same amount of data to deliver an ad unit. But I mean, there's some instances where we're seeing that as high as 80%. So for us, it's about focusing on reducing that wastage, maximizing avoidable emissions, and that's really the focus of what we offer our partners and clients.
What's the top level percentage that your method of delivery reduces the traditional video ad delivery by?
We've seen it as high as 80%.
Yep,
yeah.
just thought I'd
So
make that clear because it's interesting.
You know, less data means less emissions, so that's really what our focus is.
Sorry, I'm diving into the next session there. Getting ahead of myself. So, look, Carolyn, one thing you mentioned there was collaboration, and for us as an industry body, yes, we're in Australia, but there's a regional alignment, and there's actually a global. We are working, we're communicating closely with the Europeans in particular on this particular topic. So how do you, from your experience, how would you advise that we try and ensure that we have that meaningful alignment both here and kind of everywhere?
Well, I think it's through, you know, organizations like the IAB, and it is through that that collaboration. And there's many ways of going about it, but you know, starting across your own value chains and speaking to your suppliers, your customers, because there's actually lots of opportunity here as well. Like in the first thing everyone should be trying to do is use less and make things more efficient. And so by working with through your supply chain, like what we found with other industries is that you know, you might potentially shy away from who you think is the largest emitter in your supply chain because you may not have values alignment. But actually, once you start to engage, that's where you can have the biggest impact. And it's not necessarily a values misalignment. It's other priorities. You know, companies have other priorities. And once you start to engage and educate, the power of that collaboration is just tenfold. And I think. So I work a lot in sort of the public reporting space of all of this information. And in Australia, we're in some ways in a bit of a fortunate position where other geographies have advanced, either through, you know, regulatory requirements or broader stakeholder requirements. So there's a lot to be learned from other geographies as well. So to the extent there's global collaboration, either through, you know, companies that have global counterparts or global ownership, or even just looking at the industry bodies that can be global. There's a lot to be learned overseas.
Yeah, thank you, because it sounds maybe like a weird analogy, and for this audience in particular, if you remember viewability when it first came out, a lot of the inconsistencies in terms of measurement, frankly, was a world of pain for a number of years. I think everyone's forgotten what that was like, and there is a similarity in terms of measuring what we're trying to do here and keeping it consistent.
JJ, I might add.
Jump in.
So from an industry perspective, and I've come from a viewability background, so I'm very conscious of the industry standard. And what we want to work to do is not make it scary, not make sustainability a cost. We want to make it a win-win situation. We want to do good for the planet and also be good for profits as well. So for you in the group who's thinking, oh my God, what is this going to cost me? How am I going to sell it internally? Do it by little, but also this is actually a great opportunity. So from a people career perspective, climate is a growing industry. Sustainability is the hottest topic. So if you study it and learn it and be that advocate for your business, it'd be great personal growth. But also businesses who take that leap. You know, Group M has done it, Seen This has done it. If you do it, there's actually so much advantage as a business to stay ahead and be competitive.
Yep.
There's actually lots of opportunity to do it. So don't be afraid. Kind of go into it, look at the challenges, but you'll come up better on the other side.
Yeah, it's classic ad tech. Opportunities and challenges. That's how it works. And actually, in terms of action, Seb, over to you. I know because the Essence in the UK, which is part of Group M now, they've announced they're launching a dedicated sustainable supply marketplace to work with, and that's interesting. I think. Can you see that rolling out as a bit of a trend in terms of just action over here as well?
I can. I think, I mean, I haven't spoken to the team in Essence in the UK, but from what I understand, they've curated a set of publishers that meet some criteria they set out for success, and they're going to measure the activity there, and they'll offer that solution to advertisers who want to take part in it. But I think as we get alignment on measurement, we'll start to find that once you've got measurement, you're able to optimise in a more efficient and a more confident way. So I do expect that to happen. I think in the next 12 to 24 months, we'll start to see some quite the notion of carbon emissions becoming a much more important topic in the way that people allocate their brand expenditure. It's happening now, and I think to June's point, it kind of can be a bit scary. And a year ago, I really didn't know too much about this, so I think lots and lots of people are on quite a steep learning curve. But I'd encourage everyone to throw themselves into it. And I mean, whilst we've put lots of energy into this, we completely expect to make loads and loads of mistakes. Whilst we learn loads of things, we're going to make lots of mistakes. But I do think that we'll get there. So if I look at how we'll approach it from a Group M perspective, so the offshoot of the white paper that we released earlier this year is that there's going to be a carbon calculator that's released. That'll be at a channel level, so that'll give us a view not only from a digital perspective, but across 11 other channels that we've measured, and that's captured in the white paper. As that evolves, we'll look to speak to our media partners to populate that calculator with partner-level data. And then we can start to really get into a level of granularity to understand how advertisers can optimise their buys to reduce the overall emission load on their media expenditure. But I think marketplaces from a digital perspective will absolutely be a part of that solution moving forward.
And that's a bit of a call to arms too in terms of participation, right? And as we saw, everything is interconnected. So whilst there might be measurability on the media owner side, it's actually what's coming from the agency side that actually is impacting that.
JJ, can I jump in again?
Of course you can.
Yeah, so
Can't stop you, June.
Adding it from a brand perspective, like people might be wondering, why is Group M, why are these vendors out here talking about sustainability? A lot of it's actually driven by corporate. So, PwC, we're working with the biggest global brands globally, measuring their Scope 1 and Scope 2. They've got it pretty much down to pat. They all have set net zero targets by 2030 or 2050. So us as a digital advertising industry, a lot of brands, kind of like a media agency, invest a lot of dollars into advertising, and Scope 3 is actually the biggest carbon emission footprint. They shied away from it previously, but now they know they have to really tackle it if they want to achieve decarbonisation target. And from a brand perspective, it's not just a CMO. Like you talk about viewability. Like no CMO or CEOs are going to say, oh, what's my viewability score for the year? But they actually care about their carbon footprint for the year because it's published in their sustainability reports. So that's one of the big drivers as well. So from a financial share price perspective, it's impacting corporate brands, sustainability. Consumers are voting with their wallets. They want to buy more sustainable brands. And then third one is employee engagement. So, employees want to work for big companies that have purpose, and achieving their sustainability goals is a key purpose they need to meet.
Yeah, I found it really insightful going back to, I would say this, but the Q&A articles we ran last year, you look back on it and some of the signs of what was to come in there from some massive brands, it's really quite insightful.
Yeah, and I'd also add, I think like ASIC has just recently put out a focus on greenwashing. So there's also a strong awareness and push towards having some strong substance behind anything you're putting out in the market, in either a green product or, you've put a net zero target out that includes Scope 3 emissions, but you haven't even measured your Scope 3 emissions. Well, that's not actually doesn't give the investor much confidence that you have a view on how you're going to get there. So those are the types of things that ASIC is now paying attention to, which is also driving the companies to really get to a good understanding on the measurement and then the trajectory down.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I know it's ironic to say this, moderating a panel, but it is time to sort of act, to start doing stuff and not talking about it. Again. So Adam has seen this Swedish company. I've got Swedish roots, believe it or not. And I know that they, in IB Europe, particularly the Swedes, have been very active in this space. Do you have any insights in terms of what's happening there that might be happening a bit sooner in terms of initiatives globally than here?
Yeah, I think there's some really important and exciting conversations that are going on. I think, just from what we were saying earlier, I think what we need to see is an industry-led framework of measurement. We can't really mark our own homework. I think it can't be ad tech led. It's got to be driven from industry. So that's a really important factor. And certainly the work that the IAB Europe are doing, which is incredibly collaborative with the other European IABs in formulating and just listening to what industry has to say. But I think, that's certainly something we can learn here. And we're very much focused on driving that industry conversation and then understanding what metrics we can measure. To Caroline's point, start small, but we need to start somewhere. It's too big of a problem not to act on now.
Yep. In fact, you guys are chairing that steering group.
We are, yeah.
And they very kindly included us on it. So we're invited to the 3am calls. Haven't made them yet. But getting the notes, and we promised to sort of openly share what we're doing with them, and I think that's the right way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Global collaboration is on a topic as important as this is vital.
Yeah, and also Canada are very engaged, and we've got Tech Lab on the case as our technical kind of IAB partners. So one of the threads of conversation we've had in our councils is in relation to what you could call unintended consequences. So June and maybe Seb, you might have an opinion on this too. So particularly in terms of, I suppose, the focus on the sell side, the supply chain. If we don't want value to be pulled out of it necessarily, and there's an aspect of naturally, like who's going to pay? Like how's that going to actually work? Are there any areas there that we just need to ensure we avoid as an industry?
I think the biggest thing to avoid is do nothing at all. Like I think we are talk about decarbonisation. We're talking about 2030, which is less than 8 years away. So we need to take action today. So my thoughts from a Scope 3 perspective, when we talk about collaboration, when we talk about brands, agencies and publishers, I really want to position it as a win-win for all, for people to take action straight away. We don't want people to have, we call it FOFO, fear of finding out. People are really nervous of measuring and going, you automatically assume that you're the biggest emitter. But we want to say that, working with all the partners together, get people to measure and be comfortable with it, but everyone have their own set benchmark and then reduce it from there. So I think that's a key one, don't be afraid to try and do and start doing it today.
Okay.
Look, I'd agree. I mean, the message that we're taking to our media partners is very much you need to take a step now, and that step should begin with measurement. So you've got a baseline so that you can start to create, if you need to, the commercial conversation internally with the powers that be to make sure that, if you do need to make adjustments to your business, then there's a well-grounded, objective view on why that should be done. And I think, if that conversation's not happening now, then we'd encourage everyone to really get onto that as quickly as possible, because lots of people are looking at that quite quickly. And I think also, there are some easy wins that you can implement, and that's looking at how perhaps how many SSPs you're working with. Do you need all of them? Can you reduce the number of ad calls that you're generating from each sort of piece of demand that comes through? There's lots of little easy wins, but I think you need to get a good baseline of measurement first and understand where your business sits so that you can capture any improvements that you do make, because that's going to help internally the commercial case if you need to adjust the way you do business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and based on my conversations, the opportunity is if you as a supplier, as a seller, are able to prove where your benchmark is and say you're going to reduce it by 20%, 30%, agency and brands want to work with you. They want to decarbonise. It's in their KPI, in their public net zero target. If you come to that with a table, that's when you see the spend shift. You're going to see the spend shift, people to go green media, I want to buy more sustainable. So the opportunity is there to measure and also reduce.
But could there be a compromise to this? So we've got a gaming working group. We got all excited about metaverse, Web3, and actually the level of computational effort for the future that's being conceptually discussed right now is serious, I can tell you. So is there so it's about a balance. There has to be a compromise, but could there be a limit? Are we limiting the potential future of what we're up to in this, or do we just need to be efficient in what we're doing and just find that balance as we grow, Adam?
Yeah, again, I think from our point of view, it's about, where can we utilise technology, existing technology that delivers efficiency right away. And as I said before, the current sort of legacy tech that our industry is built on is very ineffective in terms of the data consumption required for content consumption. Streaming is an extremely efficient way of doing that, and we're only going to see the increase of data, as you said. I think there's reports that data consumption will increase by a factor of 40 before the end of 2030. It's from the just the explosion of online video or video consumption. It's the the growth of mobile subscriptions, which are extremely high, and just the expectation of consumers expecting instant HD content on demand. So it's about finding and utilizing existing technology and improving on that. But really, as I said before, it's our focus for our partners and clients is to deliver a tech solution that focuses on avoidable emissions, and to what Seb said earlier, offsetting should be the last resort. That should be for unavoidable emissions. So, that's our position.
It's kind of classic ad tech because it comes in little waves. There's a feature that's released as a product that actually innovation can resolve for this, and we'll wait and see a whole new slice turn up in the Lumascape. Sorry, June.
Yeah. Don't want to compromise. We want to grow. I want my son to, be able to live the life we live, be able to play in a virtual universe. But in order to achieve that, we do have to live in a net zero or net carbon environment. So I think we need to remove the waste, the low-hanging fruit, but then also continue to innovate because we need to live as humans.
Yeah, and I'd also add that that's why it is, the measurement is absolutely one thing, and there's collaboration to get the measurement right. But once we've measured it, it's the solutions require everyone in an organization. It's a finance question because the measurement of the emissions reduction is an important element, but is also one element in the decision tree. Like, what are the costs associated over what time frame? What sort of products do we want to be able to deliver? What are consumers asking for? And what's that balance between the service provided and doing it in an efficient way? And so that's the other thing that we've learned cross industry is the touch points through an organization. It's almost everyone within it to find the solution.
But building on that, so the way that we tend to work as the IAB is in terms of voluntary standards, and the best ones, say programmatic or declaring oneself transparently within the moving parts of programmatic, for instance, they work when everyone sees their value, they commit to them and voluntarily adopt. But to push it a little further, is there a case here for enforcement at some stage? Have you seen that in other industries? Is that something? I know I'm provoking a bit, but
I mean, so the history is there has been regulation for the large emitters in Australia. That's probably where the regulation has stopped. I think regulation is coming. It's certainly coming overseas, which will start to, and when I say regulation, I mean the measurement and reporting of all levels of emissions. So we'll see it in the States. It's coming in Europe, and to to the extent you've got interactions with those geographies, you'll start to feel it. But I do think in Australia, we're already starting to see the shift as well, and it's more, stakeholder, shareholder demanded and led, and that voluntary can still work. Like through the collaboration can absolutely still work, and it's staying engaged with your stakeholders to understand what they need. And in that voluntary framework, it's the using the reporting avenue to explain how you're doing things, and that there needs to be an element of understanding and almost forgiveness in everyone's working through this, describing what you're doing now, what you're doing today, how you're measuring today. Might not be how you measure tomorrow, but at least you started.
Great. So as we've seen Group M's commitment, it'd be interesting to know what's kind of next on the radar that you can talk about, Seb, on this. What's the next step? I know you mentioned a little bit about the relationships with partners and bringing them in.
Yes, so I think that's going to evolve over the next year or so. To Caroline's point, the entry point into an organisation to get data to populate a more detailed carbon calculator, we recognise that's a complicated ask, and it's not going to land with the people I normally speak to. So some organisations have ESG specialists, some it's going to be finance, some it's going to be legal, some it will be procurement. So we'll work through that over time, but The other thing that I think we've sort of observed at Group M in Australia is that we need to do this more than just a sort of specific vertical within our business. So internally, we've developed plans under a project name called Group M Alpha. Alpha being the new generation of kids born before 2025. So they'll be our largest ever generation, and they'll inherit the world. And really, this is how we try and bring what we're doing to bear to our entire organisation. So we've got people plans. So our people and culture team are trying to work out how we can advise staff on their own My Net Zero plans, so individuals can feel like they're contributing a little bit more. It's a small gesture, but we plant a tree for every member of staff when they join the business. We've talked about how we're working with partners, but then also from a client perspective. Again, a lot of our advertisers are on different areas of the journey when it comes to sustainability. So we want to create frameworks that allow them to be educated, to create something a little bit more objective so they can benchmark where their business sits from an advertising function. And we'll be rolling out a lot more of those initiatives next year.
Great, thank you. I'm conscious of time, partly because I waffle, we always go on. I'm getting the stop signal, but I'm going to throw it out for one more question at least. If there's one or two burning questions, I'll get killed later, don't worry, I'm quite used to it. If there are any. No, all right. Well, I think the information that we've received today, I hope you find useful. Those slides will be made available, and you'll hear a lot more in the coming months, no doubt, as the panel rightly said. Get involved. So please give them a round of applause, and thank you very much.